Welcome to another episode of Medicine 3.0, your podcast for AI in medicine, precision medicine. And this week, I had the honor of interviewing a friend. Scott Barstow is a good friend of mine, known him for over a decade now, and he shares a little bit of his health journey as a Bionic member and a little bit how he thinks about health. I really think you're going to enjoy it. All right, Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but I was a guest on your podcast about like 8 or 9 years ago. So I think it's time for a payback.
That's right. I remember it well. I remember it very well. And I'm really excited.
No, this is awesome. To start off, do you mind just telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I've been in software and technology forever. I was the CTO at a startup here in Raleigh, Durham that ended up being really successful. And I went from there to doing a number of different fractional CTO and technology advisory kinds of things, which is how you and I met.
Yep.
Way back in the day when you were running iScribes. And I currently work for a private equity firm that buys older software companies and then modernize them and eventually turn around and sell them. We've got about 45 or 50 software companies in the portfolio. Personally, I've lived in Raleigh now for, it's been almost 25 years. And I've got two kids. One of them is married and out of the house, and the other is in college. And in terms of stuff I do, and as we think about like the conversation we're about to have, I've always been really active in sports. I played a ton of sports growing up. And like, if it has a ball, I like doing it, sort of thing. But really, I think struggled when I think, as a lot of people do, as your kids get older and you get really busy, it's much harder to stay active, or at least I found it really hard to stay active. And also, I think the things you could do when you're 20, you can't do when you're 40 or 45, or at least I can't. And so I think it was difficult for me to make that transition and figure out ways to stay healthy.
Yeah. I mean, aging is just like this interesting thing. You don't really expect it to happen to you, but then you just starts happening.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about you is you taught yourself how to swim from a book. So tell people a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I can't remember how I found out about it. I think it was the guy I was working for at the time. And I had two kids who were in swim club. It was swim club over the summer, and they seemed to really enjoy it. And everybody swims growing up, or most people do, but I had never like gotten in a pool and swam laps. And I can't even remember the name of the book at this point, but there was this book that this guy told me about, and his thing was, it will teach you how to swim in a way that you can swim long distances. If you've never done that before, it's kind of the easiest way to do that. And so one of the last summers that our kids were in swim club, I just started going to the pool and swimming laps. And I read this book, saw some videos online, and just started swimming. And that was probably, it's probably been 8 or 10 years ago now. And it ended up being the best thing I've ever found for exercise, because you can do it really quickly. It's 30 to 45 minutes, and it's a full workout. That's really no stress on the body. And for me, it's turned into almost like a religious experience when I get in the pool. And I think a lot of people talk about swimming that way, as like the world kind of goes away. You don't hear anything. And really all you have is like the next stroke. And that's really all you can think about. And it's been this way it's kind of like being in the shower, and that lots of things get resolved when I'm in the pool. And I often have a lot of my better ideas when I'm swimming. So it's been the best thing I've ever found health-wise.
I love that. I think the book is total immersion, because
yes, that's it.
I tried to learn that way too. I just didn't stick with it. I think I tried it for like a half hour, and I was like, this book doesn't work.
Yep. Yeah, that's the one. Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So like you said, you've always been kind of active. And you and I were reminiscing. It was, 4 or 5 years ago, we were sitting on a plane across from each other, and we started talking about health. So I'd love to hear whatever you're willing to share about your journey as you kind of started going through aging, not being able to do what you could do when you were 20, and deciding to kind of take a little bit more proactive stance on your health.
I think this all started. So I remember the conversation with you well, but I think probably 2 or 3 years before that,
Mm,
I had heard a podcast with Peter Attia. And I
mm,
think it was on Tim Ferriss. And this was back when I think he was just getting started. Not Tim Ferriss, but Peter Attia. He's just kind of coming on the scene. And he talked about this idea of health span
mm,
and the idea that you kind of start at one, and then as you age, you eventually approach zero. And when you hit zero, you're dead. And
yeah.
his idea for me, which was revolutionary, is that the longer you prolong that line closer to one,
Hmm.
the better your life will be. It doesn't mean that you'll necessarily live any longer, but the life you live will be much better.
Right.
I think what he talked about was health failures are cascading generally.
Mm,
And, if you fall and break your hip, as you get older, if you fall and break your hip, all of a sudden you can't move. So therefore everything stiffens up, or, these things cascade. And I think those were really the two ideas that for me were foundational in all of this. Is there's this thing called health span that's as or more important than lifespan. And
hmm.
this idea that failure is cascading failure. And so you have to work to prevent the things that cause the bigger things to happen. And so physically, that's things like making sure you've got good balance and all these things so you don't fall and hurt yourself so you can't exercise. And then I think what you and I have gotten into that I didn't really understand a whole lot about, honestly, I've not had a ton of background in, doing blood work or paying attention to anything. I think I did what everybody does is I kind of went to my family practice doctor once a year and got the basic CBC blood test. And it was like, yeah, everything's fine.
Hmm.
Because on that test, everything generally was.
Right.
And so I didn't have any sort of foundation around, well, I should be paying much more close attention to these markers or whatever. And so I think that's where I think I didn't know where to go look for that stuff. I didn't know doctors who did it. Um, and so I think our conversation was really the first one I had with somebody I knew who
Hmm.
was actually thinking about this stuff and knew what to look for and how to kind of think about it. So that's how I got interested in this to begin with.
Yeah. And I think those two, I mean, you obviously did a great job listening to that podcast, because those two key points of health span is so much more important than lifespan. I'll talk to people all the time and they're like, I don't want to live till I'm 90 or 100. And it's
Right.
not because if they were healthy, they wouldn't mind it, but they've seen their loved ones sit in nursing homes, and people have terrible dementia. And that is awful to watch. Um,
It's horrific, and my wife's mother went through that recently, and it's
mm,
like this journey downward for her was just, yeah, you watch people disappear before your eyes. And I think what's been super interesting to me is to understand that growing up, you always assume that these things are inevitable. Like
right.
you're born with these hereditary things, and oh, well, your mom has Alzheimer's, so you'll have Alzheimer's, or your dad had heart disease, so you'll have heart disease. And I think what's been great for me is to understand, yes, you might have a predisposition to those things,
Yeah.
but you can actually do something to at least postpone or arrest those things from coming on. And a lot of times, I think if you catch it early enough or start it early enough, you could probably prevent them from happening, even if you do have these genetic predispositions. So I think that's what's been really helpful for me to understand is that it's not a sentence on your life just because you've got these genetic or hereditary things in your life.
I think that that is such a good insight also. It's funny because we've done all these genetic studies on long-lived people, and they do have different genetics than the average person. But
Right.
if you can change like whatever it is that's aging us, whether that's a blood biomarker, inflammation, loss of muscle mass, if you can change that physically, then it is the same thing as changing it genetically. Like you're
Right.
getting the same outcome. And I think that's such an important insight to have as well.
Yep.
So we have our conversation. You start getting interested, and then kind of what were the next steps for you? How did you kind of proceed on your journey?
So I ran into, and I don't even remember how this happened, but I think I met someone whose husband was a kind of a functional medicine
Hmm.
doctor, and it happened during COVID. I remember that because at the time I was looking for alternative treatments for COVID. Like
Right.
if I and I don't want to get into the whole vaccine thing, but I was just like, if I get it, what are my options for minimizing the impact on me or whatever? And I had done a bunch of reading on that and wanted to explore that, but I couldn't find a doctor who was taking an alternative approach. Anyway, I get introduced to this doctor, and it turns out he does all of this stuff that you and I have been working on now for the past 3 or 4 years together. So he did wellness care instead of sick care was his
Hmm.
approach. And it was really the first time that I went through a full blood panel and, hormones, everything. And it was incredibly insightful. And I found it empowering, as I think most people do. It can be scary. You find these things that are like, holy smokes, I'm on my way to having this disease, or if I keep going down this road, I'm going to have these problems. But I think what was great for me is like now I have information. I have somebody who's not, their incentives are not to prescribe medicine and to, um, to take the traditional path, but it's like, I'm okay. You have this problem. I'm going to help, you should be taking these supplements. You need to start doing these kinds of things. You need to change your diet this way. It got very specific
Yep.
instead of being, I don't know. I think most doctors, because they don't have the time, like they can't
Yeah.
sit and spend 2 hours with you talking about your blood work because it's just not how the system's set up. So I think
Right.
I've very fortunate to be able to afford that kind of thing, and then B, find this person. And so that ended up being the catalyst for me. And so I went through, I think, probably 12 or 18 months, maybe a little bit more, with him every 6 months, blood work, and all these different tests. But what I felt like was missing is it was still very um, kind of like a very high touch approach, and so you
Hmm.
kind of had to go there, and it was and it was all of that was fine, but I just felt like there had to be another way. And so when you guys started Bionic, I think it felt to me like the right combination. Obviously I love technology, so there was that angle of it. But it seemed to me that like I shouldn't have to go see the doctor unless I need to, and um, like this data, I should be able to see. I think one of the things, it wasn't like a tech forward. This first person wasn't a tech forward approach, so I did my own. I put all the data in a spreadsheet and did my own analysis. I like, am I getting better or am I getting worse
Yep.
across these markers? And would go research. Okay, my level for this should be here. I'm going to make this cell green in the spreadsheet or red or whatever. So I was kind of doing a lot of that on my own,
Yeah.
which is fine. But I think I also was probably missing a bunch of things because I don't know what I'm doing. So
Hmm.
anyway, it felt like that's what got me interested. And then I felt like the next turn of the dial was when you guys started this. It felt like, okay, there's technology at the center. I can do all this on my phone or whatever, see all my results. It felt like a better approach for me.
Yeah. The functional medicine space, I'm really grateful for the people that have worked in that space. I love the focus on health care and health rather than sick care and sickness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also, I mean, part of the reason we started Bionic Health is we wanted to make it more affordable, more accessible, easier to use, all of those
Yep.
things. you kind of fit, somebody who's willing to build their own spreadsheet. That's pretty rare to track their biomarkers. And but I think that's awesome. I'm curious, as you went through like that first full panel, and even as you still go through like full panels of blood work, how do you deal with, because it's like you said, there's things that your regular doctor just doesn't talk about, doesn't have time or attention, insurance doesn't pay for it, whatever. And so
Mhm.
you don't really talk about it. So there's a lot more that comes out of these extensive blood tests. How do you deal with like the stress or the anxiety or the desire to make those things better? How do you personally kind of deal with that?
Yeah, so I would say at the start, it was a very negative experience for me.
Mhm.
It was like, I think I treated it as, holy smokes, I've got all these things wrong with me that I had no idea about. So now I've got all of these other things to worry about.
Mhm.
And I think somewhere along the way, I think what made that flip is that as I started doing things, I could see the change.
Right.
And so I think what that communicated, at least to me, was okay, I may be in this spot right now, but if I do the things that I need to do, I can actually make these things move and I can
Mhm.
see the results. I think that for me was where it moved from being, I don't know what to do about this and I know this isn't right, to be feeling confident that I have somebody who's going to give me good advice. And then, but a lot of it is on me. I have to eat better. I have to, I've got to work out more, or I've got to work on strength, which is something I've never done, or whatever the thing was. I think it
Mhm.
was, for me, it was like, okay, I just need to go do these things and I can watch the results change I mean, it's not real time, but it takes, I think we do our tests once every 6 months or something like that.
Mhm.
And so, you've got this. And I think the other thing that was really helpful for me is that it wasn't a year from now that I get the
Mhm.
next test. It was 3 months or 6 months was the longest I had to wait to see, am I making progress or am I not making progress? And so it's been really motivating for me to, um, to be able to like take action and then see, my body composition change or whatever, and
Yeah.
actually know how to measure it. Because I think if you don't have something like what happens with Bionic and we could do all of this on our own, right? I could go get a DEXA scan, I could do all these things, but I think what is good about this kind of approach is that I have somebody that's like holding me accountable,
Mhm.
um, and checking in and just like, okay, are you doing what we said we were going to do? How's it going? All of those kind of things. So it's like I have somebody in my corner for the first time. And again, as I said before, your family practice doctor, there's no way they can be this
Yeah.
in touch, and so I think that's why it's worked for me. Is it's this really neat combination of, okay, I can do these things and affect the results, and then I also have a group of people who I know are rooting for me to do it. As cheesy as that sounds.
Right. It makes a difference. It makes a difference to have people that care, like,
Yep.
they care that you're getting
Yes.
better. And it's
For
funny,
sure.
once a week, we'll have this little, we call it our care team meeting, and we go through our wins first. And so our team will report back like, hey, Scott's crushing his swim workouts and doing strength training like he hasn't done before, and like all that stuff. So it's awesome that like we really are kind of cheering for you. And it's interesting that you talk about like the tech forward approach, being able to text us whenever you want, because you may not know this, but you also played a role in kind of thinking in this way. I think it was like 8 years ago, you were like on a walk one night and I don't know, something stung you and you texted me and you're like, hey, my
That
my
sounds right.
arm, my arm is swelling up. It's red. And I was like, oh, well, text me a picture. And then I told you what to do and you were better the next day. And
I
again, it
remember
was,
that. Yeah,
yeah, it's one of those moments where I was like, that's how healthcare should be. Like everybody should kind
I
of have
totally
like
agree. Yeah.
a, a doctor in their pocket to be able to say, hey, what should I do about this?
Yeah, so there was that one, and then if you also remember, there was another similar incident where I was working on a bike chain
Oh yeah.
and popped a link off of the chain and went straight into my eye.
Hmm.
And I remember my eye went completely red, and I was like, "Well, this is the end of that eye," and I was freaking out. And and I remember telling, and this was so I was self-insured. I think
Hmm.
important detail. I was self-insured, so I was like, "Well, if I go to the hospital, it's going to cost me this, or it's going to cost me that." and and I remember telling my wife, I was like, "You need to call Jared, and he can tell me what to do." And I remember uh, her having a conversation with you, and you had her like turn the camera around and
Hmm.
look at my eye, and you were just kind of like, "Yeah, he needs to go to the hospital," uh, and because I didn't want to go,
Yeah.
but it was another similar moment of just like it was access for me that, and I had the same thing on both of those occasions. I was like, "This is how it needs to work."
Right.
Like this is way more efficient than going to urgent care, doing all of that stuff. Like this is how it should work. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully someday everybody can kind of have that kind of access.
right.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious, over the last couple of years, what have been the biggest health changes for you as you've gone through your process? What are your biggest wins? If you look over the past 2 years, you're like, you know what, this thing changed. I'm super happy about it.
I think the first one that comes to mind is, as I mentioned earlier, I've never been a weightlifter, even though I've been in every kind of athletics I could ever think of. I've always been kind of spindly. I've always had really skinny arms, and I've just been kind of from a strength perspective because I don't enjoy it.
Hmm.
I don't. It's for me, like lifting weights was something meatheads do, and just wasn't my thing. And so I remember when I had the first DEXA scan with Bionic, um, and I got my body composition back, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is not great." Like I have more body fat than I thought I did. I have these visceral fat issues, and I just my muscle mass is not where it needs to be. Kind of going back to the Peter Attia thing, he talks all the time. Every time you listen to him and others, like you have to build muscle mass. It has all these knock on benefits,
Hmm.
and I think that was a real wake up call for me, because I think at the time I don't remember, but I think by and large my blood work was pretty decent. Like most everything was kind of in line, and then this really stood out as I do not have my act together here,
Hmm.
and so from there I remember getting that and being really depressed. But then understanding, I think what we had a call about it, and then the folks on the care team put together like, okay, here's how you get started lifting
Hmm.
weights. and and I think from there, what I've seen over the past 12 months, so I just went back and got another scan, and I dropped, I forget, I think I dropped 12 pounds of visceral fat and added 3 pounds of muscle in 12 months. And my body composition, like if you look last year's scan to this one, was completely different.
Yep.
Um, and so that for me has just been, it shows that I can do it. And I still don't put on muscle mass very easily. I think it's just not, I think it's some of it's the way I'm built or whatever, but it's really difficult for me to put on muscle mass. But I think that's been one of the big changes. I think the other is the maniacal focus, rightly so, on like glucose and how much sugar I consume and all of those kind of things. As we worked through the diet stuff, I think I had always thought, oh, I eat pretty healthy. I think most people think they eat pretty healthy. I eat salad for lunch and I do this and I do that. And I think when I got into the nitty gritty of it, what I figured out is that, first of all, I was eating way too much. And I don't think I realized that. Your word was overnourished. That was your kind word for just like you're eating way too much. And, and I don't think I knew that,
Mm.
because I swam. I was at the time, before I started doing weights, I was swimming 6 days a week, at least a mile every day. So I could just burn all of that. I burned most of it off working
Hmm.
out. So I didn't gain weight. And so my thought was, oh, I think I'm probably eating just fine. Um, but as we worked through it, and I actually started to just eat less, and we talked about the 800-gram fruit and vegetable challenge, and that was really
Right.
helpful for me. That was the mechanism I used to break the cycle of how I ate. And so I
Hmm.
did that for, I don't think I ever got to 800 grams a day, but I probably got to 600 or so on a good day. But it broke the, whatever the habits were of just
Hmm.
eating a lot of other stuff because I was
Right.
full.
Yeah.
And, and so I eat way less now. Um, and I think that has a lot of benefits. Just my body doesn't feel like it's always working on digesting food. I now kind of understand what that feels like, much more so than I did before. And I just realized I don't really have to eat very much to stay. If I eat the right things, I don't have to eat very much to sort of have plenty of energy and do all these things. So I'd say those are probably the two big changes in the last, and those have both been really in the last 12 months, habitual changes that I can tell have made a big difference.
I think one thing that sticks out to me about both of those is it took understanding first for you. You really had to
For
understand
sure.
what was your body composition. Why did you need to lift weights? Why wasn't your body composition where you wanted it to be? If you wanted to have a great health span, you really had to figure out and learn for yourself. And I think
Yep.
it's true of most people. Most people, like, you know, if you go to the doctor for 15 minutes once a year, they will tell you you need to eat healthier, you need to exercise, but you can't understand very much in that amount of time.
No, no. And I think everybody's probably different in how, the things that they need to do. And I think
Yep.
there are things that I enjoy eating. And unless somebody tells me you absolutely can't eat it, like I'm not going to stop eating a cookie. That's just not, I'm not going to go that hardcore because
Yeah.
for me, I love food. And
Yep.
so I think for me, it was a matter of, yes, I can do that, but I have to, it's one instead of two, or
Right.
it's, I get the kids' ice cream instead of the two scoops of ice cream. And, and what you figure out is that it's just as satisfying to
Hmm.
have the kids' scoop as it is to have the two scoops. And so you really I don't notice it anymore. And it's actually the opposite. If I eat a whole dessert or something like that, it just feels like, gosh, I didn't need the last 10 bites of that at all. There was
Right.
no marginal benefit. I didn't enjoy it any more than I did the first five or six. So yeah, I think it's just been this journey to like moderation, for lack of a better word. I don't drink nearly as much as I did, and I didn't drink a lot, but I drink very little alcohol now. I have almost no soda. Um, and so those things were habits for me for a very long time. And I think those have been the big changes.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say is, like, this was all gradual for you. I think if somebody were to listen to you, I mean, you live like you thought you had a clean lifestyle before. Now it's extremely clean. If someone were to listen to you, they'd be like, "Oh, I'll never be able to do what Scott does." But this was something that took time, took effort, but you gradually got better and better at it. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I don't, I'm not, I'm a, there's this thing people talk about like systems versus goals.
Yep.
And I'm not a goals person. I
Hmm.
don't think about what I'm going to be doing 5 years from now and plan for that. The way my brain works is I make small changes over time, and those changes then compound, hopefully, in my favor. And so for me, this approach has been really helpful because it's like, okay, we need to change, based on this blood panel, we're going to work on these things for the next 6 months. But we're not going to work on all of these things. We're going to focus on these things and we're trying to fix these. and we're going to fine tune this. And then, we go back and that's better. Okay, now it feels like we might need to work on this thing for the next 6 months. So for me, it fits how my brain works really well because it's small changes over time that eventually compound into like meaningful results.
Yeah. And I think that's, for most behavioral science, shows that that's the way to do it, right? When people set goals, they're thinking about perfection. And I always talk about progress over perfection, and systems
Yep.
lead to progress, and
Yeah.
progress leads to where you want to be. So
Yeah. I worked for this guy who always used to say, we suck less every day. And that's kind of how I think about it is like, I'm just trying to suck less every day.
perfect. Aren't we all? I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad we had the chance to catch up on all of this.
Yep. Thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. Feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.